Welcome to the end of Holy Week. And by goodness gracious, thank God it's Good Friday. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Green Rush Live, the Business of Cannabis show. I'm Jimmy Young with Pro Cannabis Media, and I am always joined by my good friend and sidekick. Who's that
David
again?
Rabinovitz.
There's David Rabinovitz. There he is. And we welcome him in every Friday. And look, my microphone's already playing games with me, but that's okay. I hope everybody can still hear me. But wait, let me do a little. This is like a behind the scenes thing because we don't have like an audio guy I can call. Joining us here today, at least at the beginning of the show, is also an old friend, but also someone who is a servant of the public. He's a member of the House of Representatives from the great state of New Hampshire. His name is Tim Egan. Hello, Tim.
Jimmy, how are you? Greetings from Northern Vermont, where I teach at Northern Vermont University, but I am the member of the House of Representatives for Grafton 2, which is Sugar Hill, Franconia, Lisbon, Lyman, Monroe, nestled in the nice White Mountains where we still have snow.
And you have snow, and it was probably snowing last night based on how cold it is in the Massachusetts area on this particular Friday. But we wanted to bring you in, Tim, today, obviously, because, very quickly, almost every New England state is going to have legal adult use cannabis. And that might leave New Hampshire as the lone state to not. But I understand there is some movement in the Granite State, as they say. Tell us a little bit about what is going on in New Hampshire as far as the legalization of adult use of cannabis.
I would be glad to. And just to let your viewers know and remind you, I'm actually the co-chair of the House Cannabis Caucus. We have a 400-member House of Representatives. There's about 30 of us who are focused on looking at expanding what is currently the medicinal use that we have allowed, and as well creating adult use cannabis. The biggest issue that we've been saying to other state leaders is that we're becoming an island, right? In the middle here is the island of New Hampshire. Adult use in Massachusetts, adult use in Maine, adult use just came across the threshold in Vermont. There's some winds of it coming from Rhode Island. Canada, the country, has adult use. Provinces like New Brunswick and Nova Scotia have very active provincial works operations like the state of Massachusetts does and Maine has. So we're now becoming this island of barren excitement and revenue generation. And I think what we're seeing with the amount of legalization passing in like this week in New York and New Mexico is states are realizing that in a post-pandemic, cash-strapped, state-run facility, they have to figure out ways to create new revenue besides taxing their consumers and their residents. And so by looking at adult use cannabis and the good amount of revenue that can be generated, like we've seen in Colorado or we've seen in Washington or California, that states have realized they have to do this. Not that they want to do that, but they have to do it. It's like looking at, alcohol or some states with gaming. In New Hampshire, we actually have legal sports book. And we don't have casinos, but we have sports book and we have lottery and we have low tax on alcohol and we actually have a low tax on cigarettes, yet adult use cannabis seems to get pushed by. The reason why is there's still this old school mentality with a little bit of respect I'll put into the old school mentality. The old school mentality still in New Hampshire, because we're 61% of our state is over the age of 60. And it's the drugs are bad, back to the Reagan era of just say no. But you add into that post financial crisis, New Hampshire was really hurt by the opioid crisis. And I think there's still some of that in the mindset of senior leaderships in the Senate and in the administration, that they're still grappling with the results. Governor Sununu is not a uncooperative governor. He works well with both sides of the aisle, but he's very adamant about the idea that cannabis is going to lead to opioid crisis. And he inherited, this mantle Governor Hassan had done a good job. As senator, she's still very supportive of the state in fighting this opioid crisis. But there's still this culture in New Hampshire that cannabis is a gateway drug. Well, that's false. So we have to educate our leadership that that's not really the case. And that when you look at some of these other states that have had these similar issues, they have been able to get the consumer to understand that there's a difference and get the leadership to understand that there's a difference and be able to open up an industry. So we're sort of still struggling, but yes, Jimmy, you're exactly right. We're bringing up the rear and we're at the risk of a few things. And I'll pause there because I can tell you what they are, but I know you have that look of another question in your eye.
Yes. And of course, I also want to take off on something you mentioned, that most of your constituents and your population in New Hampshire are 60 plus. The fastest growing market that are interested in what's going on in the cannabis world is that 50 plus group of baby boomers that are looking to improve their lives through wellness. And this is the angle that is softening some of the stigma out there among some of those old school, although I like to call them age appropriate people. But yeah, but my point is, do you see an opportunity now, besides the aligning of the stars with the pandemic and looking for ways to increase jobs and taxes and that sort of thing? Is everything coming together now in New Hampshire as it is? And it does look like Rhode Island and Connecticut are going to move forward too.
We'll see. I wouldn't say it's totally coming together. We're beginning to see some movement. There are two bills that on April, and I'm not sure when how long your show will be up. So I'll clarify for your viewers that, the 7th, 8th, and 9th, our House session will have two bills that are coming up, House Bill 90 and House Bill 272. House Bill 272 is tied to labeling and packaging of and sale of hemp products and non-psychotropic CBD. So that has an ought to pass out of their criminal justice committee. So that's a good sign. And ought to pass means that, that the committee's for it. And it was a 19-0 vote out of committee. So we feel comfortable that may pass, and that'll begin to sort of allow the Department of Health and Human Services to begin to sort of promote, cannabinoids as general healthcare item, which they haven't been before. It's only been this small medicinal THC strain that they would promote. Unfortunately, House Bill 90, which is about allowing treatment centers to use CBD and THC as alternatives to helping folks get off of opioids, meth, or heroin or other drugs. The idea here was to sort of help them in therapy. That actually got a vote out of committee against, because they're worried that the Health and Human Services and Elderly Affairs, they just don't know enough about the science. It was a good idea by a rep to present this bill. So, we're still in that one step forward, two steps back, maybe a step and a half back. And then every once in a while, we get a little giant step forward. The giant step forward was actually what happened in the state of Vermont. And the idea that, that you're able to grow and possess, cannabis was a huge move forward. And then for the state to then recognize that we want to create an industry. So I think Mass and Maine were good pressure. And now Vermont is even better pressure, because now, the state has to realize that we're going to see those 60 plus consumers either drive out of state and spend their money somewhere else, or New Hampshire, which is their second largest industry, is tourism. People that want to come hike, ski, snowboard, do whatever that they do outdoors. They're usually sort of environmentally, socially, culturally outdoor minded, and therefore they'll enjoy cannabis as part of their lifestyle as opposed to other, less than alcohol. They're going to start making their destination choices for states where it's easy to get because it's legal in shops and available and legal to use. And so we're boxing ourselves in. And so that's been sort of the one step forward, two and a half steps back struggle that we're facing here in New Hampshire.
David, I bet you have a question ready to go for Tim.
No, I'm actually finding it very, very fascinating. I'm thinking about you're boxed in, and so now they're going to sit back. The marijuana is already in New Hampshire. We know that. Now they're going to get legally purchased marijuana, and I happen to think, selfishly, as a marijuana advocate, I'd like to see New Hampshire legalize. As a Massachusetts resident, I don't want to see you guys legalize so we can capture all the revenue, right? Let them buy it down here, bring it up there, and we'll get the 20% sales tax. And I thank you, live free and die state of New Hampshire.
And that's a struggle that I'm trying to articulate. Every time another store opens in Maine, in Mass, there's now public hearings in towns like St. Johnsbury and Greensboro and other towns in northern Vermont, where they're having, town select board hearings on opening a license. I keep telling my fellow reps, that's another place that's going to direct our residents out of state, and they're going to direct tourists to make a decision to not come to New Hampshire. And we don't want to be the place where old white fuddy-duddies go to, not pay sales tax. Right. But not even recreate. I mean, the big push, the big success, most New England states, or maybe the top three, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, have more deaths than births and no or low inward migration, except for New Hampshire, because young people are coming here for the quality of life, and older folks are coming here because of the no income tax or sales tax. But at some point, that's going to balance out if there are other attributes that the states have, like legal adult use cannabis, and more importantly, not just using it, but if you're a young person and you want to get into an innovative business, I'm telling students that I teach in college that are studying business, look at the cannabis industry. It's taken off like a rocket. It's the next cell phone. It's the next internet, because it's, New York announced New York made their announcement. They immediately said within the next 3 to 5 years, they could see $2 billion in revenue. Right. Who doesn't want to be in that business?
Yep. Yeah, it is true. You mentioned that New Hampshire has a medical program. Can you outline a little bit about what exists at this point in New Hampshire?
It's actually really stringent. There are 6 dispensaries, and you are required by your primary care physician to have a prescription for it. And those healthcare issues are very particular, tied to cancer treatment or other treatment that would otherwise might require surgery. So the idea that it could be expanded more for folks around, that might need some psychological help, may have post-traumatic stress syndrome issues. Those are the areas where we think on the medicinal side, it could grow and be more advantageous as a healthcare alternative to the state. But right now it's very closely held and very closely controlled. And again, that's part of the New Hampshire. We don't really run fast in new directions. We're very slow to get there. I'm still amazed that we actually have sportsbook in the state. It was like, I think the proximity of DraftKings made it easy for the state to say yes, because they have a big headquarters in Boston, Massachusetts. But it still perturbs me that we have bipartisan support in a House Cannabis Caucus, and we still can't get 3 or 4 older senators on both sides of the aisle in the Senate and the governor to really understand the value that this could have for the state.
And just a reminder, our chat room is open on our YouTube feed, and I believe also on our Twitch feed. So if you have something to ask, or you want to throw a comment out there that might catch our eye, and I know David is able to see it a lot better than I do, since it's 4 feet away from me, and it's like this size, the font. Anyway, I do want to ask a little bit about home grow as an issue because there are some states that are allowing it. There are some states that are not allowing it. There's that factor when it comes in. When you talk moving the needle forward, does that include home grow, or does the state want to control it? Similar to how Canada controls their country as far as the control of the cannabis.
I think knowing the logic of New Hampshire and that live free or die mentality is home grow would probably be the place where we could start. There's been a lot of discussion about the potential of a similar bill that will come up in next year's session. We're a biennium. So every 2 years we have a house. This year is the budget year, and next year is other bills that are more social issues and things like that. So the idea was, because there was no direct revenue tied to this legalization bill, let's put it in year 2 of this term. So the idea would be to look at a bill similar to what passed just in Vermont about 2 or 3 years ago, which was to allow folks to possess a certain amount and grow up to a certain amount of plants. And that's sort of the best way to do it, because it allows local control, local consumer. New Hampshire is very much about local control. There's, as much as we have 400 reps and we have all these laws, we're not making laws about what you can do in your town. We're making sort of more broad statewide. So I think that's the potential, if anything, is you can grow it, you can own it, and let's start there. I think that sets up well, because if we do then have a potential of a legalization in 2021-22 year, then the new term that would be 2022 to 2024, that first year would be a budget year. And that could then immediately be, hey, we have legal adult use cannabis. Now let's figure out a way to make it monetizable, but stores or shops or dispensaries, and let's turn it into a budget item. So we're hoping that there's a bit of a 1-2 punch there. There's been a really interesting mix of folks that have gotten involved in supporting this, and that's the other thing that's grown. There are a couple lobby groups that actually that work with alcohol companies that have ownership stakes in the cannabis business. There's the ACLU, there's the Marijuana Policy Project. And then there's this interesting mix of 3 political sectors. There's sort of your progressive Democrats, who are sort of they're open to, I get calls from them and they're asking me about when are we going to have a bill about psychedelic mushrooms like they passed in Oregon or Washington? And I'm like, that's not going to happen yet. There's that group. There's the sort of the blue dog Democrats like me, fiscal conservative, socially liberal, which is you should do whatever you want in your own backyard. And if we can actually turn that into business, that's good. And then there's this unique slice of the Republican Party, which is sometimes troubling, but sometimes good, that libertarian mindset, which is they don't want any government. So while they don't want to pay taxes and they don't want you to, tell them where to send their kids to school, they also don't want you to tell them what they can't grow or smoke or own. So I find myself with having interesting conversations, agreeing with people who normally on gun issues or school funding issues, I'm diametrically opposed. So I think as those audiences get a little more closer together and grow, and maybe I'm not going to say that there's going to be 3 parties in New Hampshire, but there's sort of a left, a right, and a center, and we're getting more coordinated. And I think that's where the potential is to pass something.
Well, there you go. Tim Egan, representative, teacher, TV producer, you're a jack of all trades, but your Wi-Fi is playing games because you're popping in and out on us.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, someone was calling while I was Zooming. And I also know it's your time for your break, which is, can I throw you to your 4:20 break, which is the best line ever.
Jim,
yes,
Jimmy.
you can. And more importantly, you know where Jonathan Edwards lives, don't you?
No.
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
He's been a long time native of New Hampshire. All right, so here's a quiz. Since Tim, you think David, tell me one thing about 420, the origination of it.
It was all, the whole thing is a hoax crafted up by some Boston guy named Jimmy Young. So he could have, knowing that years later he was going to launch a podcast, and he didn't even know what a podcast was. He spent 10 years walking around saying, in my dreams, I had this thing about a podcast. For 3 years after that, he would go to small lakes and collect lily pads, thinking that that was somehow going to be part of his podcast.
No,
Is
that wasn't
true,
it.
Jimmy? Oh.
Tim, you tell me one thing about the origination of 420. Go ahead.
Oh my gosh.
Where did it begin? Where did it begin? It didn't begin in Massachusetts. It didn't begin in New Hampshire. Where did it begin?
Tim, San Rafael. Here, I'll pass you down the information. Just reach up and grab it.
Okay.
San Rafael, California is where it all began, with a bunch of high school students from that high school
Called the Waldos.
called the Waldos. See, I knew he knew because he heard me say
I've
it
been
so many
listening
times.
to this thing. It's on script.
That's right.
You have to memorize it before you're allowed to come on as a co-host.
And the connection to Jonathan Edwards is in 1971. That song Shanty was around and was played fairly regularly in the greater Boston area when I was a young teen. And I might add that it was also drinking age was 18 back then. Anyway, long story short, this song by Jonathan Edwards kind of served as our celebration of 420 in my neck of the woods. So Tim Egan, again, always a pleasure to talk with you. You know, you always have a place to come and talk about what's going on in New Hampshire. So we thank you for that. But we're going to take our 420 break. We're going to sit back around the shanty and listen to Jonathan Edwards talk more. And then when we come back, we've got a handful of educators that we're going to talk about the business of cannabis education. And that's coming up after this break on the Green Rush Live. Don't go away.